He appeared as the city was waking, not with a flash of light from the heavens, not with the trumpet call of an angel. He appeared in the most ordinary of ways, sitting on a simple park bench in the heart of New York City, as if he had been there all along. The city, in the early morning, was a symphony of noise, not music, but noise. The shriek of a distant siren, the rumble of the subway deep beneath the pavement, the percussive hiss of 1,000 espresso machines, and the cacophony of 1,000,000 conversations starting at once. It was the sound of ambition, of haste, of a world that never slept because it was too afraid of what it might find in the silence. People flowed past his bench like a river of purpose, men in sharp suits with futures to build, their eyes locked on the stock tickers on their phones. Young women in workout clothes, their ears plugged with podcasts on self-improvement, running from a quiet moment. Tourists with maps and cameras, consuming the city's landmarks without ever truly seeing them. They were all moving, all striving, all connected to a digital world and completely disconnected from the man sitting on the bench. He was the eye of the hurricane. In the midst of all this frantic energy, he was perfectly still. His clothes were simple, the kind that belonged to no specific time or place. His hands rested on his knees, not clenched with purpose, but open with patience. He did not hold a phone. He did not read a paper. He simply watched. And he listened. He listened past the noise of the traffic and the chatter. He listened to the silent cries of the human heart. He heard the loneliness behind the confident stride of the businessman. He heard the insecurity behind the perfectly curated smile of the social media influencer. He heard the deep, aching weariness beneath the frantic energy of a city that was running on empty. His face was a study in paradoxes. It was the face of a young man, yet his eyes held an ancient, sorrowful wisdom. There was a profound sadness in his gaze as he watched the world he had created rush past, so lost in its own noise that it had forgotten how to listen. But beneath the sadness, there was a current of love so deep, so unconditional, that it seemed to be the very thing holding the chaotic scene together. The people who passed, if they noticed him at all, saw only an anonymous man, perhaps homeless, perhaps a traveler resting his feet. They gave him a wide berth. They did not see the king sitting on a humble throne of parkwood. They did not recognize the architect, admiring, with a broken heart, the beautiful and flawed city his children had built. The pilgrim's gaze, which had been sweeping across the river of humanity, finally settled on one person, one drop in the ocean. Her name was Sarah. To the world, Sarah was the definition of success. At 45, she was a senior vice president at a major financial firm. Her suit was impeccably tailored, her watch was worth more than a small car, and her phone was the latest model, a black mirror that served as her scepter and her shield. She walked through the park not with the leisurely pace of a visitor, but with the clipped, purposeful stride of a conqueror claiming territory. She was the personification of the city's noise, a walking embodiment of its relentless demands. As she walked, she was engaged in 3 separate conversations. One was through the AirPods in her ears, a conference call with Tokyo, her voice sharp and authoritative. The second was with her thumbs, flying across the screen of her phone, texting curt instructions to her assistant. The third was the one inside her own head, a frantic, overlapping monologue of anxieties. "The Q3 report is a disaster," the voice in her head screamed, even as her mouth calmly discussed market projections with Tokyo. "Did I remember to confirm Lucas's dental appointment? I have to call the caterer for the fundraiser. Why hasn't Mark replied to my email? If we lose the Henderson account, it's my neck. I'm so tired. God, I'm so tired." Her heart was a battlefield. Her mind, a crowded, noisy marketplace. She was at the top of her game, the pinnacle of her career, and she had never felt more empty, more perilously close to collapse. The perfectly constructed tower of her life felt like it was swaying in a wind only she could feel. She needed a moment, just a moment to think, to regain control. She saw an empty space on a bench and strode towards it, already pulling out her laptop from her expensive leather bag. The world could not stop. The noise could not cease, not even for a second. She sat down, her focus entirely on the screen in front of her, a fortress of productivity against the chaos of her own soul. She was so consumed by the noise within and without that she did not notice the man sitting silently at the other end of the bench. He had not moved. His gaze was now fixed on her. He did not see a vice president. He did not see a power suit or an expensive watch. He saw a daughter. A beloved child, lost and exhausted, building walls to protect a heart that was starving for peace. He saw a soul drowning in a sea of noise. She saw only an empty space on a bench. The greatest journey of her life was about to begin, and the first step was only a few inches away. For a long moment they sat at opposite ends of the same bench, two separate worlds occupying the same small space. He, in his profound stillness, was an anchor of serenity. She, in her frantic activity, was a storm contained in a human form. He saw her, every layer of her being, the successful executive, the worried mother, the lonely woman, the frightened child. She, however, saw nothing but the glowing screen of her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicks forming a desperate staccato rhythm. A new email would arrive, and a fresh wave of cortisol would flood her system. A notification from a news app would flash, announcing another global crisis, adding another layer of anxiety to her already overburdened mind. She was building a fortress of productivity, not to keep the world out, but to keep her own emptiness from consuming her. The conference call with Tokyo was ending, but a new one with London was about to begin. In the small gap between them, she had to finalize the presentation slides, text her son to remind him about his application deadline, and reply to a dozen urgent messages that had piled up in the last hour. The noise in her head was a cacophony of deadlines, demands, and disappointments. "I can handle this," she told herself, a mantra that had lost its power long ago, but was the only one she knew. "I just need to focus. I just need to be more efficient." And it was in that moment of supreme self-reliance, as she reached for a printed report to cross-reference a number, that the universe, or perhaps the architect of the universe, decided that her fortress needed a breach. It began not with a thunderclap, but with a flutter of wings. A flock of pigeons, startled by a passing dog, suddenly took flight in a chaotic burst. The gust of wind from their collective takeoff caught the edge of her meticulously ordered stack of papers. For a heart-stopping second, she watched in horror as her report, the product of 100 hours of work, the key to the multi-million-dollar Henderson account, was lifted into the air. The pages, once her loyal soldiers standing in perfect formation, became a flurry of white butterflies dancing mockingly in the wind before scattering across the park lawn. Simultaneously, a tinny voice in her ear said, "We seem to have lost you, Sarah," and her AirPods went silent. Her phone, which she had been using as a hotspot, had finally died. The collapse was total, complete. In the space of 5 seconds, every single one of her connections to the world of control had been severed. The report was gone. The phone was dead. The conference call was lost. For a moment, she just sat there frozen in disbelief. Then a wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over her. It was a physical sensation, a tightening in her chest, a shortness of breath. The noise didn't stop, it just turned inward, becoming a deafening scream of failure. She stumbled off the bench, her movements clumsy and desperate. She began chasing the scattered pages, scrambling on the grass, the hem of her expensive suit jacket getting stained. Some pages floated into a puddle, others were trampled by unseeing pedestrians. It was a hopeless, humiliating exercise. The carefully constructed image of Sarah, the powerful executive, dissolved into the reality of Sarah, a frantic woman on the verge of tears in the middle of a public park. The man on the other end of the bench had watched the entire scene unfold. He had seen the gust of wind, the scattered papers, but more importantly, he had seen the terror in her eyes. He had seen the crack in the dam. He did not sigh. He did not offer a wise, knowing smile. He simply